Our younger daughter Claire, well, she's proof not every child turns out to be a success story. Those were the exact words my father said into a microphone in front of 126 guests at my parents' 25th wedding anniversary party while a waiter refilled champagne glasses under a crystal chandelier and everyone in that ballroom turned to look at me. My name is Claire Whitaker, I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life my parents believed I was the weak one in our family. The quiet one. The disappointing one. What they didn't know that night, standing there in their rented ballroom at the Harborview Grand outside Boston, was that a sealed envelope sitting in my purse contained the legal document that would change the balance of power in our family within 72 hours. But before I tell you how that envelope got there and why that anniversary party was the last time my parents ever saw me as weak, take a second to like the video if stories about proving people wrong resonate with you, subscribe if you enjoy long real-life style drama like this, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are because I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the moment everything finally became clear to me. The Whitaker Silver Anniversary Gala was exactly the kind of event my father loved. 200 invitations printed on thick ivory cardstock, valet parking in a circular driveway lined with white lights, a ballroom filled with business partners, extended family members, and the kind of acquaintances who only appear when there's an open bar and a chance to network. My father, Richard Whitaker, built his reputation as a confident executive who always had the room's attention, and that night was no different. He stood at the center of the stage in a tailored navy suit holding a glass of champagne while a spotlight reflected off the gold .25 decoration behind him. My mother Elaine stood beside him smiling in a silver dress that probably cost more than the car I drove through most of college. My older sister Olivia sat at the front table with her fiancé, already laughing before my father even finished the first joke in his speech because she always knew when the audience was supposed to laugh. I was seated 3 tables back next to 2 of my father's colleagues who barely remembered my name. That had always been my place in the family. Not quite invisible, but never the center of anything either. When my father started speaking, the tone was exactly what everyone expected. He talked about hard work, about loyalty, about how proud he was of the life he and my mother built together. People clapped at the right moments. Waiters moved between tables with trays of champagne flutes. My sister squeezed her fiancé's hand while cameras flashed from relatives trying to capture the perfect anniversary photo. Then my father reached the part of the speech where he started talking about his daughters. Olivia first, of course. Our oldest, he said, smiling toward her table, graduated top of her class, went straight into corporate law, and somehow still manages to make us proud every single day. The room erupted in applause. Olivia lifted her glass like a politician acknowledging a crowd. Then my father looked across the room until his eyes landed on me. There was a pause just long enough to make sure everyone followed his gaze. And Claire, he said with a chuckle that made several guests lean forward expectantly, well, Claire reminds us that not every child is meant for the same path. A few people laughed politely, the kind of laugh you give when you're not sure if something is actually funny but the person with the microphone is important enough that you respond anyway. My father continued, smiling like he was delivering a harmless joke. Some kids thrive in the spotlight, he said, gesturing toward Olivia again, and others are still figuring things out. That line got a bigger reaction. My mother lowered her eyes toward the table like she always did when my father said something that might be a little too sharp. Olivia laughed openly this time. The guests followed her lead. And for a moment the room felt very quiet to me even though more than 100 people were sitting around those tables. The thing about moments like that is they never arrive alone. They bring every memory that came before them. The time my parents bought Olivia a brand new Audi for her 17th birthday while handing me the keys to her old Honda with the dented bumper. The year they paid $78,000. in tuition for Olivia's Ivy League law program while telling me a state university loan would build character. The countless dinners where my father praised Olivia's ambition while describing me as sensitive or still searching for direction. Standing there in that ballroom, listening to people laugh, I realized something important. It wasn't the first time my parents had underestimated me. It was just the first time they had done it in front of more than 100 witnesses. And maybe that's why the moment felt strangely calm instead of painful. Because earlier that same evening, before the speeches and the music and the champagne toasts, a man in a charcoal suit had walked quietly across the ballroom floor and handed me a sealed envelope. Inside that envelope was a document signed months earlier by my grandfather Henry Whitaker, the man who founded the company my father now controlled. A document that would activate in 72 hours if I chose to use it. A document that would allow the board of directors to remove my father from leadership of the very company he believed defined his legacy. At the time my father made that joke about me still figuring things out, he had absolutely no idea that the quiet daughter sitting 3 tables away was the one person who could change everything. And the truth is, I didn't know yet whether I would actually use that power. But as the laughter faded and the music started up again in that ballroom, one thought settled quietly in my mind like a decision waiting for the right moment. If my parents believed I was weak, tonight would be the last time they ever made that mistake. For as long as I could remember, our family had operated on a very clear system, even if no one ever said it out loud. Olivia was the investment. I was the backup plan that nobody expected to succeed. The difference showed up in numbers long before I understood what it meant. When Olivia turned 16, my parents rolled a brand new white Audi A4 into the driveway with a red ribbon across the hood. I still remember the exact moment because my father filmed the entire thing on his phone while my mother clapped and neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. The car cost $43,000 according to the dealership tag still sitting on the dashboard. When I turned 16 2 years later, Olivia handed me the keys to her old Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it and a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot accident she never bothered to fix. My father tossed me the keys and said, "This one should last you through college if you take care of it." I thanked him because that was what I had learned to do. Gratitude was always expected from the child who received less. Birthdays followed the same pattern. Olivia's 18th birthday included a catered dinner at a downtown restaurant, 20 guests, a custom cake, and a gold bracelet my mother later told her cost $3,200. My 18th birthday happened at home with a grocery store cake and 5 relatives sitting around the kitchen table. No one thought that was strange. That was simply how things worked. The same logic carried into school. Olivia attended a private prep academy outside Boston where tuition was $34,000 a year. She had tutoring for calculus, private SAT coaching that cost $400 per session, and a summer leadership program in Washington that my parents proudly described as an investment in her future. When it came time for my high school years, my parents suggested the local public school because, as my father explained over dinner one night, it builds resilience when kids learn to compete on their own. I did not argue because by that point I had already understood something important. Fighting the system never changed it. Observing it quietly sometimes did. The college decisions made the difference even clearer. Olivia was accepted to Columbia Law School after finishing her undergraduate degree at Georgetown. My parents paid every dollar of that education without hesitation. Tuition, housing, books, travel, everything. I once overheard my father telling a business partner that investing $280,000 into Olivia's education was the smartest financial decision he had ever made. The same spring that conversation happened, I sat across from my parents at the dining room table with my own acceptance letter from Northeastern State University. My father studied the letter for less than 10 seconds before sliding it back toward me. "That is a solid school," he said, "but if you want to go there you will need to take out loans." Your sister's program is expensive and we have to prioritize. I nodded even though the math felt impossible at first. Tuition was $26,000 per year. Housing added another $12,000. Books, transportation, and basic living costs pushed the total close to $40,000 annually. 4 years meant $160,000. My parents contributed zero. Instead, I worked 2 jobs during school. Mornings at a coffee shop starting at 5:30. Evenings filing paperwork at a small insurance office 3 nights a week. I slept about 5 hours most nights and learned to stretch every dollar. Meanwhile, Olivia spent her summers interning at my father's company, Whitaker Financial Holdings, where she was introduced to executives and clients as the future of the business. Every holiday dinner sounded the same. Olivia discussing corporate law cases while my father nodded proudly. Then eventually someone would turn toward me and ask politely, "So Claire, what are you planning to do after college?" I would answer honestly that I was studying financial compliance and corporate regulation. Most people nodded politely. My father usually smiled the same way he did at the anniversary party years later, the same polite expression that suggested the answer did not matter very much. What none of them realized during those years was that the classes they considered unimpressive were quietly giving me something far more valuable than prestige. While Olivia studied litigation strategy, I studied how companies collapse when leadership becomes careless. I learned how debt structures hide behind clean balance sheets. I learned how boards of directors can legally remove executives who forget that a business is a system rather than a personal trophy. I also learned something about people. When you grow up as the overlooked child, you spend more time listening than speaking. You hear conversations others assume you are not paying attention to. I heard my father discussing leveraged loans with investors during holiday dinners. I heard him brag about expansion projects that seemed much larger than the company's actual revenue could comfortably support. At the time I did not challenge him. I simply remembered the numbers. Years later those numbers would matter more than anyone in that ballroom could possibly imagine. But at the time I was still the quiet daughter sitting at the edge of family photos, the one relatives described as thoughtful or sensitive when they could not think of a more impressive word. And for most of my 20s my parents seemed completely comfortable believing that story. They believed Olivia was the architect of the Whitaker future. They believed I was the child who would eventually drift into a modest career somewhere far away from the center of power. They believed that because they never once asked what I had been studying all those late nights after work, or what kind of job I accepted quietly 2 years after graduating. They never asked because in their minds the answer would not have mattered. And when people stop asking questions about you, they also stop noticing when you quietly become far more capable than they ever expected. The first person in my family who ever treated me like I was capable of something more than quiet disappointment was my grandfather Henry Whitaker. Most people outside the family knew him as the man who founded Whitaker Financial Holdings in 1978 with one rented office in downtown Boston and a second-hand desk he bought at a government auction for $90. By the time I was born the company had grown into a regional financial services firm managing hundreds of millions of dollars in commercial investments. To the outside world my father looked like the architect of that success because he had taken over the company when my grandfather retired. Inside the family though the truth was simpler. My grandfather built the company. My father inherited it. When I was a child I did not understand the difference but my grandfather certainly did. Every Sunday afternoon when I was about 10 years old my parents would drop Olivia and me off at his house in Cambridge for dinner. Olivia usually spent the afternoon watching television or scrolling through her phone while I wandered into the study where my grandfather kept shelves full of old ledgers and framed photographs from the early years of the company. One afternoon when I was 13 he noticed me studying a thick binder filled with balance sheets from the 1980s. Most adults would have told a child to put something like that down. My grandfather pulled out a chair beside me instead. "Numbers tell stories if you know where to look," he said while tapping a column of figures with a fountain pen. I did not understand everything he explained that day, but I understood enough to feel something shift in the way I looked at the world. He showed me how one real estate investment in 1984 nearly pushed the company into bankruptcy because the loan terms were poorly structured. He showed me how a careful refinancing 2 years later saved the entire business. Most importantly, he showed me how the health of a company is rarely about the headline numbers people brag about at parties. It is about the relationships between those numbers. Debt ratios. Cash flow timing. Hidden liabilities that slowly build until they become impossible to ignore. For the next several years, those Sunday afternoons became our quiet routine. Olivia eventually stopped coming altogether because she said it was boring. I kept showing up because my grandfather treated every question I asked as if it mattered. When I turned 16, he gave me my first real lesson about leadership. A business does not fail because of one bad decision, Claire, he told me while sliding a stack of documents across the desk. It fails because people with power stop paying attention to the small warning signs. I did not realize at the time how carefully he watched my father run the company he once built. My father liked bold expansion. New offices. New partnerships. Larger loans that made annual revenue numbers look impressive during investor presentations. My grandfather rarely criticized him directly, but every now and then during those quiet study sessions he would ask me a question that sounded simple at first. "What do you notice about this debt schedule compared to the one from 5 years earlier? Why do you think the operating margin dropped even though total revenue increased?" At first my answers were clumsy guesses, but over time I started seeing patterns. The company was growing faster than its financial foundation could comfortably support. The debt load increased almost every year. Several investments depended on market conditions remaining perfect for a long time. My grandfather never said my father was making mistakes. He simply watched my reasoning carefully whenever I pointed out something unusual. The summer after I graduated from college, he invited me to lunch at a small restaurant overlooking the Charles River. He was 79 years old then, but his voice was still steady and direct. "Your father believes success comes from confidence," he said while folding his napkin carefully beside the plate. "Confidence can be useful, but it is not the same thing as understanding risk." I asked him why he was telling me this instead of talking to my father. My grandfather smiled in that quiet way that meant he had already considered the obvious answer. "Some people only listen to praise, Claire. Advice feels like criticism to them." Then he reached into his briefcase and placed a small mahogany box on the table between us. The brass latch clicked softly when he pushed it toward me. Inside was a sealed envelope with the name of the Whitaker family law firm printed across the front. I asked him what it contained. "Something important, but not something you need to open today," he said. "There will come a time when you understand why I gave it to you. Keep it somewhere safe until that day arrives." I took the box home that afternoon and placed it in the back of my closet beside a stack of textbooks and old notebooks from school. Months passed and then years. Life moved forward. I started my career quietly in financial compliance consulting, analyzing corporate structures for firms that wanted to avoid regulatory problems before they happened. My parents rarely asked about my work because Olivia's career always produced more exciting headlines. Meanwhile, my grandfather grew older and eventually passed away 2 years before my parents celebrated their silver anniversary. At the funeral, my father delivered a speech about legacy and leadership that received a standing ovation from relatives and business associates. I stood in the back of the room listening carefully because by then I understood something that almost no one else seemed to notice. The lessons my grandfather had quietly shared with me were beginning to make more sense every year. especially when I looked closely at the financial reports Whitaker Financial Holdings continued publishing under my father's leadership. My grandfather's funeral took place on a gray October morning in Cambridge 2 years before the anniversary party, and even though the church was filled with more than 200 people, I remember feeling like the entire room was strangely quiet beneath the polite condolences and respectful handshakes. Business partners, former employees, and relatives all stood in small circles sharing stories about the early days of Whitaker Financial Holdings. Many of them spoke about my grandfather as if he had been a force of nature, the kind of leader who built something lasting through patience and discipline rather than noise. My father stood at the front of the church in a dark suit greeting guests with the calm authority he always displayed in public. People kept telling him the same thing again and again. Your father would be proud of how you continued his legacy. Every time someone said it, my father nodded with the confidence of a man who believed that sentence completely. Olivia stood beside him looking composed and professional, already the image of the future executive everyone expected her to become. I stood several steps behind them near the end of the receiving line, watching quietly the way I always had. At one point an older man approached me after offering condolences to my father. He introduced himself as Daniel Mercer, one of the original board members from the early years of the company. He looked at me for a moment with the curious expression older people sometimes have when they are trying to connect a memory with a face. You are Henry's younger granddaughter, he said slowly. Claire, right? I nodded. He smiled in a thoughtful way that felt different from the polite smiles most guests had given me that day. Your grandfather spoke about you often, he said. Said you were the one who asked questions no one else bothered to ask. That sentence stayed with me long after the funeral ended. The following weeks passed quietly while the family sorted through my grandfather's estate. Most of the legal matters were handled by Whitaker and Hale, the law firm that had represented our family for decades. I assumed my father and the attorneys were taking care of everything the same way they handled every other corporate or financial issue connected to the company. Then one afternoon about a month after the funeral I received a phone call from a woman named Margaret Hale, the senior partner at the firm. Her voice was calm but direct when she explained that my grandfather had left specific instructions requesting a private meeting with me regarding a personal matter connected to his estate. I remember sitting in my small apartment in Boston holding the phone and feeling slightly confused. My father had not mentioned anything about this. 2 days later I walked into the law firm's office on the 24th floor of a glass building overlooking the harbor. The waiting area was quiet and polished, the kind of place where conversations felt naturally serious even when no one raised their voice. Margaret Hale greeted me personally and led me into a conference room where a thick folder sat on the table beside a familiar object that immediately caught my attention. It was the same mahogany box my grandfather had given me years earlier. Margaret folded her hands and explained that my grandfather had created a legal trust arrangement shortly before his health began to decline. The trust contained a clause that would remain dormant unless it was activated under specific circumstances defined within the document. According to the instructions he left with the firm, I was the only person authorized to open the envelope and review the contents when the time felt appropriate. I asked the obvious question. Why me? Margaret smiled slightly, the kind of expression professionals use when they are careful not to reveal too much emotion in a legal conversation. Your grandfather believed you had a particular perspective on the company that others in your family might not have, she said. He believed that perspective might become important one day. She slid the mahogany box across the table toward me. I held it in my hands for several seconds before opening the latch. Inside was the sealed envelope I remembered from that lunch years earlier. Margaret did not ask me to open it in front of her. Instead, she explained that the document inside described a governance mechanism connected to the company's board of directors. Under the terms of the trust, if I ever believed the leadership of Whitaker Financial Holdings was placing the company at serious risk, I could deliver the document to the board along with supporting evidence. Doing so would trigger a legally binding review process and temporarily transfer executive authority away from the chief executive officer until the board completed its investigation. I understood immediately what that meant. My father was the chief executive officer. Margaret added one more detail before the meeting ended. The trust included a 72-hour activation window once the document was formally submitted to the board. During that period, the board could vote on a no-confidence motion that would permanently remove the current chief executive officer if the evidence justified such action. When I left the building that afternoon, the envelope was resting in my bag beside my notebook and car keys. I did not open it right away. Instead, I drove home and placed the mahogany box back in my closet where it remained for nearly 2 years. Life continued the way it always had. My father expanded the company into new markets. Olivia became more involved in the legal side of corporate operations. Family dinners remained polite and predictable. No one asked about the box sitting quietly behind a row of winter coats in my apartment. And I never mentioned it because I was not yet certain whether the moment my grandfather had imagined would ever actually arrive. The first time I seriously wondered whether my grandfather had been right about the company was about 8 months before the anniversary party, during a quiet Tuesday evening in my apartment when I was reviewing a public financial disclosure that Whitaker Financial Holdings had released for investors. My job at the consulting firm required me to read documents like that almost every day, usually for companies I had never heard of, but this time the numbers belonged to the business that carried my last name. On the surface, everything looked impressive. Revenue had increased to $320 million that year, nearly double what the company reported a decade earlier. My father often mentioned that number proudly at family dinners. But the more carefully I studied the report, the more something felt familiar in a way I could not ignore. The patterns reminded me of the case studies my grandfather used to show me at his desk in Cambridge. Revenue had grown quickly, but so had the company's leverage. Total outstanding debt had climbed from $80 million to nearly $210 million within 5 years. Several of the company's newest projects relied heavily on variable interest loans tied to market conditions that could shift rapidly. None of those choices were illegal. In fact, they were common strategies for companies that wanted to expand aggressively. But they also created a structure that depended on constant growth to remain stable. I printed the report and spread the pages across my kitchen table. For the next 3 hours I worked through the numbers the way my grandfather had taught me years earlier. Cash flow timing. Debt service ratios. Long-term liabilities compared to liquid reserves. By midnight, a quiet realization had formed in my mind. The company was operating far closer to the edge than anyone in my family seemed willing to admit. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention whenever my father mentioned business updates during family gatherings. Olivia had officially joined the company's legal department by then, and my parents talked about her progress constantly. My father described new real estate acquisitions in Florida and Texas, each worth tens of millions of dollars. He spoke about expansion the way people speak about victory, as if growth alone proved that everything was working perfectly. No one questioned him. My mother nodded proudly. Olivia discussed legal contracts with confident enthusiasm. I sat quietly and listened the same way I had for most of my life. One evening during dinner at my parents' house in Weston, my father leaned back in his chair and announced that the company had just finalized a $95 million development partnership in Phoenix. The room filled with excitement as Olivia congratulated him and my mother raised her glass in celebration. I asked one simple question. What interest structure did the financing use? My father looked at me for a moment as if he had not expected me to speak at all. Variable rate, he said casually. The bank offered a favorable starting percentage. That answer confirmed what I had suspected while studying the financial report. Variable rate loans were inexpensive at first but unpredictable over time. If the market shifted even slightly, debt obligations could rise quickly. My father noticed the thoughtful look on my face and laughed lightly before turning the conversation back toward Olivia's latest legal project. "Claire always worries too much about details," he said with a dismissive smile that everyone at the table seemed to accept without question. Later that night while driving home I realized something that made the envelope in my closet feel heavier than it ever had before. My grandfather had not left that document with me because he wanted revenge or family drama. He left it because he understood how easily confidence can turn into carelessness when no one in a room is willing to challenge the person in charge. Over the next several months I quietly gathered information the same way any responsible compliance analyst would when reviewing a corporate structure. Everything I examined came from publicly available records or standard financial disclosures. I built a timeline of the company's expansion projects and compared them against debt obligations that matured over the next 5 years. The picture that emerged was not catastrophic yet, but it was fragile. If the economy slowed or interest rates increased significantly, Whitaker Financial Holdings could face enormous pressure to refinance several major loans at the same time. That kind of situation could force the company into difficult decisions very quickly. Through all of this my family remained completely confident in the future. Olivia was preparing to move into a more visible leadership role within the company. My father continued scheduling investor events and expansion announcements. And the silver anniversary celebration for my parents' marriage became the next big social event everyone looked forward to that year. The invitation arrived in the mail printed on thick ivory cardstock just like the others had. 200 guests expected. Formal attire requested. I placed the invitation on the kitchen counter beside the financial documents I had been reviewing that evening. For a long time I stood there looking at both things side by side. One represented the public image my father loved to present to the world. The other represented the quiet risk that image was built upon. A few minutes later I walked into my bedroom closet and opened the small mahogany box resting on the shelf behind my coats. The sealed envelope inside looked exactly the same as it had the day my grandfather gave it to me. I held it in my hands for several seconds before placing it carefully inside my purse. I did not open it yet. But for the first time since receiving it, I began to understand that the moment my grandfather had predicted might be approaching sooner than anyone in my family expected. The night of my parents' anniversary arrived with the kind of polished elegance my father always believed success should look like. The Harborview Grand Ballroom overlooked the water just outside Boston, and every detail of the event reflected the image he liked to present to the world. White linen tablecloths covered round tables arranged across the floor, crystal chandeliers cast warm reflections across the ceiling, and a string quartet played near the stage while guests arrived through a set of tall glass doors. Valet attendants lined the entrance outside, guiding luxury cars into the circular driveway as if this celebration were a corporate gala rather than a family milestone. 200 invitations had been sent weeks earlier, and by the time I arrived that evening the room was already filled with the familiar mix of relatives, business partners, investors, and long-time acquaintances who had watched my parents build their reputation over the years. Conversations drifted through the air along with the sound of glasses clinking and quiet laughter. My mother moved gracefully between tables greeting guests while my father stood near the center of the room shaking hands with the confident ease of someone who believed the evening belonged entirely to him. Olivia stood beside them looking polished and composed in a navy dress that matched the corporate tone she carried into every room. Several people congratulated her on her growing role inside the company. When I approached the reception table to check in, the event coordinator handed me a name card and gestured toward a table near the back of the ballroom. The seating arrangement did not surprise me. The front tables closest to the stage were reserved for the most important guests. Board members, senior investors, and longtime family friends sat within easy view of my father's speech podium. I took my seat quietly beside two men I recognized from previous investor meetings and spent the first hour listening to the kind of conversations that always surrounded events like this. Market projections. Expansion opportunities. The rising value of commercial real estate in several cities where Whitaker Financial Holdings had recently invested. Every so often someone mentioned my father's leadership with admiration. Meanwhile, waiters moved between the tables offering glasses of champagne and small plates of appetizers. I kept my purse resting on the chair beside me where the sealed envelope remained hidden inside. I had opened it earlier that afternoon for the first time. The document inside confirmed everything Margaret Hale had explained 2 years earlier in her office. It was a formal activation notice for the Whitaker Trust Governance Clause. If I delivered the document to the company's board of directors along with supporting evidence that executive decisions were placing the firm at significant financial risk, the trust would automatically trigger a 72-hour review period. During that time, executive authority would temporarily transfer to the board while they examined the evidence. If the board concluded that the company was being mismanaged, they had the legal power to vote for a permanent change in leadership. The document had been signed by my grandfather and notarized months before his health declined. As I read through those pages earlier that day, I felt the same calm clarity I remembered from the afternoons spent in his study years ago. My grandfather had not created chaos with this document. He had created a safeguard. The question now was whether the moment to use it had truly arrived. Back in the ballroom, the evening continued exactly as my father had planned. Dinner was served. A series of short congratulatory remarks came from relatives and longtime business associates who praised my parents' marriage and the life they had built together. Each speech followed the same pattern of admiration and nostalgia. When the final plates were cleared away, the room gradually quieted as the event coordinator approached the stage microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the front of the ballroom as Richard Whitaker would like to share a few words. Applause spread across the room while my father stepped onto the stage holding a glass of champagne. He waited until the room settled into silence before beginning. His voice carried easily across the ballroom the same way it did during investor presentations. He spoke about the early years of his marriage to my mother, the long hours building their careers, and the pride he felt watching their family grow. The guests listened warmly, smiling at familiar stories and raising their glasses when he toasted the future. Then he turned toward the topic of his daughters. Olivia first, of course. He described her academic achievements and her impressive legal career with the kind of enthusiasm that always drew admiration from the audience. People clapped as he spoke about her joining the company and helping guide its next chapter. Then his eyes moved across the room until they settled on the table where I sat. The pause lasted only a second, but it was enough for the attention of more than 100 guests to follow his gaze. My father smiled in that easy, confident way that had always filled rooms with laughter. And that was the moment the speech shifted in a direction I knew I would remember for the rest of my life. My father let the room settle into complete silence before he spoke again, the same way experienced speakers do when they know everyone is listening. He smiled toward Olivia first and lifted his glass slightly in her direction. Olivia has always been the one who understands where we are going as a family, he said confidently. She has the discipline, the intelligence, and the instinct for leadership that this company will need in the future. The guests closest to the stage nodded approvingly while several of my father's business partners clapped softly in agreement. Olivia responded with a practiced smile and a modest nod as if she had delivered this moment many times before in her imagination. Then my father slowly turned his head across the ballroom until his gaze reached the table where I sat. A small pause hung in the air before he continued. Of course, every family has different personalities, he said with a light laugh that drew a few polite chuckles from the crowd. Some children follow the path you expect, and others take a little longer to figure things out. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me at once. The kind of attention that does not feel warm or supportive, just curious. My father leaned casually against the podium as if he were telling a harmless story among friends. Claire has always been our thoughtful one, he continued. Quiet, careful, still searching for the direction that truly suits her. The laughter in the room grew louder this time. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind that comes when people assume everyone involved understands the joke. My mother lowered her gaze toward the floor while Olivia pressed her lips together in a smile that tried to look sympathetic but did not quite succeed. My father raised his glass again to conclude the moment. Every family has different strengths, he said warmly. And sometimes the greatest strength is simply learning patience while you find your place in the world. Applause followed that sentence as the audience accepted his remark as a clever and harmless observation about family life. The band near the stage began preparing for the next piece of music while conversations slowly returned to the room. I sat quietly at my table with my hands folded together in my lap. The reaction around me felt strangely distant, as if the laughter and applause were happening somewhere far away rather than just a few feet across the room. One of the men seated beside me leaned slightly closer and offered a polite smile. Your father has quite a sense of humor, he said kindly as if that sentence would soften the moment. I nodded without responding because I had spent most of my life learning how to remain calm in situations like this. The difference tonight was that something inside me felt clearer than it ever had before. I reached down and rested my hand lightly on my purse beside the chair. Inside it the sealed envelope remained exactly where I had placed it earlier that afternoon. I could almost feel the weight of the paper through the leather fabric of the bag. The speech ended and guests began standing from their tables to congratulate my parents. My father stepped down from the stage surrounded by friends and investors offering praise. Olivia moved easily through the crowd accepting compliments about her future role in the company. I remained seated for a moment longer watching the room slowly return to the comfortable rhythm of celebration. Part of me considered walking over to my parents and pretending the speech had not mattered. That would have been the simplest choice. It was the role I had always played. The quiet daughter who absorbed small humiliations without creating conflict. But another part of my mind replayed the numbers I had studied over the previous months. The rising debt ratios. The expansion projects that depended on perfect market conditions. The fragile balance my grandfather had once warned me about during those quiet afternoons in his study. This was not just about one uncomfortable joke in a crowded ballroom. It was about a company that carried my family's name and thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on decisions being made responsibly. My grandfather had trusted me with something powerful because he believed I would recognize the moment when silence was no longer the responsible choice. I slowly stood from my chair and walked toward the large windows along the edge of the ballroom where the harbor lights shimmered across the water outside. The music from the band drifted through the room behind me while guests continued celebrating my parents' marriage. For a few minutes I stood there alone looking out across the dark water and asking myself a simple question. If I used the document in that envelope, everything about my relationship with my family would change. My father would see it as betrayal. Olivia would see it as interference with the future she believed she had earned. My mother would almost certainly believe I had destroyed the stability she valued most in life. But if I did nothing, the risks I had discovered would remain exactly where they were, growing quietly inside the structure of a company my grandfather spent 40 years building. The answer formed slowly but firmly in my mind as I looked out across the harbor lights. Some decisions are not about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. Some decisions are about responsibility. I turned away from the window and walked calmly back toward the center of the ballroom where the celebration continued. Inside my purse the envelope remained sealed, but now the question was no longer whether I would use it. The only question left was when. The music resumed and the ballroom slowly returned to the comfortable rhythm of celebration, but something inside me had already shifted into a different kind of focus. I walked calmly back to my table and picked up my purse from the chair beside me. Around me guests laughed, glasses clinked, and the band began playing a soft jazz arrangement while people drifted toward the dance floor. No one noticed anything unusual about a quiet daughter stepping away from the celebration. That was the advantage of being the person everyone overlooked. I moved toward the hallway outside the ballroom where the noise softened into a distant murmur behind closed doors. A row of tall windows overlooked the harbor and the cool night air felt steady and quiet compared to the bright celebration inside. I reached into my purse and touched the envelope again, not to open it but to remind myself why it existed in the first place. My grandfather had not designed that document for a dramatic moment. He designed it as a safeguard in case leadership stopped paying attention to the risks hidden beneath the surface of success. If I used it, the process would begin immediately. The board of directors would receive formal notice and the 72-hour governance review would activate automatically. During those 3 days the entire structure of authority inside Whitaker Financial Holdings could shift. The thought might have frightened someone who had grown up expecting to stand at the center of the family business. For me it felt strangely calm. I had spent years studying the same kind of governance structures for other companies through my consulting work. The process was not emotional. It was procedural. Evidence, review, vote. What mattered now was preparation. A decision like this could not be made alone. My grandfather had always told me that responsible leadership never relies on one voice when a system affects thousands of people. I stepped outside onto the terrace where the harbor wind carried the distant sound of water against the docks. From there I opened my phone and scrolled through a small list of contacts I had quietly built during the months I spent analyzing the company's financial position. None of them were dramatic choices. They were simply the people inside Whitaker Financial Holdings who understood the structure of the business better than anyone else. The first call I placed was to Daniel Mercer, the same board member who had spoken to me briefly at my grandfather's funeral. He answered after 2 rings with the steady tone of someone used to late evening calls about business matters. "Daniel, this is Claire Whitaker," I said calmly. There was a short pause before he responded. "Of course, Claire," he said. "I wondered when you might call." His answer did not surprise me as much as it might have months earlier. People who spend decades in corporate governance develop an instinct for the quiet tensions inside companies long before they appear in public reports. I asked him a simple question. If you received evidence suggesting the company's debt exposure was reaching a dangerous threshold, would the board be willing to review it seriously? Daniel's voice remained thoughtful and measured. "The board has a responsibility to examine credible concerns," he said carefully. "The question is whether the evidence supports the concern." That was exactly the answer I expected. I thanked him for his time and ended the call. The second call I placed was to Maria Alvarez, the company's chief financial officer, a woman known for her precise understanding of every number inside the organization. I had spoken with her only twice before during industry conferences, but she knew my grandfather well and had always treated me with quiet respect. When she answered the phone, I explained that I had been studying several public financial disclosures and noticed patterns that might require closer attention from leadership. Maria did not interrupt while I summarized the main points. When I finished, she exhaled slowly before speaking. "Some of those concerns have crossed my desk as well," she admitted carefully. "But raising them directly can be complicated depending on how the conversation is framed." Her choice of words told me everything I needed to know. She had seen the same warning signs but had not found a path to address them openly. That left one final step before the document in my purse could truly become active. I needed to gather the evidence clearly enough that the board could not dismiss it as a personal disagreement within a family. The harbor wind moved gently across the terrace while music from the ballroom drifted through the open doors behind me. Inside, the celebration continued exactly as my father had planned. Guests danced, investors laughed, and the image of a successful family filled the room. Outside, under the quiet night sky, I finished the last of my calls and slipped the envelope back into my purse. The 72-hour clock had not started yet. But the moment I delivered that document to the board along with the analysis I had prepared, everything would begin moving quickly. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small, steady breath. My father believed strength meant standing confidently in front of a crowd. My grandfather believed strength meant protecting a system even when the people inside it misunderstood your intentions. As I walked back toward the ballroom doors, I knew which definition mattered more now. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the music had shifted to something brighter and several couples were already dancing near the center of the floor. My parents stood near the stage greeting guests while a photographer moved through the crowd capturing smiling conversations and raised glasses. From a distance, the entire evening looked exactly like the kind of celebration my father had always imagined. Confidence, success, admiration. I returned to my table quietly and sat down as if nothing had changed at all. That was the first rule my grandfather had taught me about difficult decisions. You do not rush a system into motion. You prepare it carefully until the right moment arrives. For the next 30 minutes I watched the room the same way I used to watch the ledgers in my grandfather's study, looking for patterns instead of reacting to noise. Several of the company's board members were present that evening because my father believed important investors should feel like part of the family. Daniel Mercer stood near the bar speaking with two senior partners from a Boston investment firm. Maria Alvarez was seated near the front tables discussing something quietly with one of the company's auditors. These were not just guests enjoying a celebration. They were the people responsible for protecting the stability of Whitaker Financial Holdings. I waited until the music paused between songs before standing from my chair and walking calmly toward the bar where Daniel Mercer stood. He noticed me approaching and offered a polite smile that suggested he understood this was not simply a social conversation. "Beautiful evening for a celebration," he said casually while setting his glass on the counter. "My father certainly knows how to host an event." I nodded. "Yes, he does." Then I reached into my purse and removed a thin folder of printed financial summaries I had prepared earlier that week. I kept my voice steady and quiet so the conversation remained private even in the crowded room. "I believe the board may need to review some information related to the company's current expansion strategy," I said. Daniel accepted the folder and glanced down at the first page. His expression remained calm but focused as he read the highlighted sections. Variable rate debt exposure. Maturity timelines. Projected refinancing pressure if interest rates increased even modestly over the next 2 years. None of the information was secret. It was simply organized in a way that revealed the pattern my grandfather had warned me about years earlier. Daniel turned the page slowly and studied the next set of numbers before looking back at me. "How long have you been analyzing this?" he asked quietly. "Several months," I replied. His eyes returned to the documents for another moment before he nodded once. "Then we should ensure the rest of the board reviews it carefully." That was the first confirmation I needed. A few minutes later I walked toward the table where Maria Alvarez was finishing her conversation with the auditor. When she saw the folder in Daniel Mercer's hands across the room, she seemed to understand immediately why I approached her. I summarized the same key points I had shown Daniel, focusing on the timing of several large loans scheduled to mature within a narrow window over the next few years. Maria listened carefully without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly and said something that confirmed my analysis even more clearly. The expansion strategy assumed interest rates would remain stable longer than the market is currently predicting, she said quietly. That assumption deserves serious review. Within 15 minutes the three of us stood together near the edge of the ballroom speaking calmly while guests continued celebrating around us. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet conversation between people who understood the responsibility that came with overseeing a company employing thousands of people. Finally Daniel looked at me and asked the question that mattered most. Does the trust clause still exist? I held his gaze for a moment before reaching into my purse and placing the sealed envelope on the table between us. My grandfather ensured it would exist if the board ever needed it, I said. Daniel rested his hand on the envelope but did not open it yet. Around us the celebration continued uninterrupted. My father laughed with a group of investors near the stage while Olivia spoke animatedly with several attorneys she worked with at the firm. They had no idea that a conversation only 30 feet away could soon change the structure of leadership inside the company they believed they controlled. Daniel finally looked up again and spoke with the calm authority that had guided the board through many difficult decisions over the years. If this document is submitted along with the analysis you prepared, the governance review process will activate immediately, he said. Are you prepared for what that means? I glanced across the ballroom toward my father, who raised his glass again while telling another story to the crowd around him. For most of my life he had believed I was too quiet to challenge anything that happened in our family. In a way that belief had protected me long enough to understand exactly when speaking became necessary. I turned back to Daniel and nodded once. Yes, I said. I am. Daniel Mercer held the sealed envelope in his hand for several seconds while the three of us stood near the edge of the ballroom surrounded by the quiet noise of celebration. Laughter drifted from the dance floor while waiters carried trays of champagne between tables. And my father continued telling stories to a group of investors near the stage. From the outside nothing about the evening looked unusual, but inside that small circle of conversation something important had already begun to move. Daniel finally opened the envelope carefully and removed the document inside. The paper itself looked simple enough, only a few pages of legal language printed beneath the heading of the Whitaker Trust Governance Clause. Yet the weight of what it represented was unmistakable. Daniel read the first page slowly while Maria Alvarez leaned slightly closer to review the language beside him. After a moment he nodded once, the calm confirmation of someone who understood exactly what he was holding. Your grandfather prepared this very carefully, he said quietly. The language is precise. The board is obligated to review the evidence if the clause is activated. Maria glanced toward the financial summaries I had prepared and then back to the document. That review would begin immediately once the board receives formal notice, she added. Daniel folded the document again and returned it to the envelope before placing it carefully on the table. The next steps must be handled properly, he said. We cannot turn a family celebration into a public spectacle, but the board has a duty to act once the document is submitted. I nodded because that was exactly what my grandfather would have wanted. This was not about humiliating anyone or creating drama inside the ballroom. It was about protecting a company that supported thousands of employees and investors who depended on responsible leadership. Daniel checked his watch briefly and then looked across the room toward the front tables where several other board members were seated. If you are certain about this, we should notify the rest of the board tonight so the review process can begin in the morning, he said calmly. I did not hesitate. Yes, I replied. He gave a small approving nod before walking toward the front tables with the envelope in his hand. Maria remained beside me for a moment watching him cross the ballroom through clusters of guests who had no idea that a governance process was quietly beginning only a few feet away. You know your father will take this personally, she said carefully. I understand, I replied. She studied my expression for a moment and then offered a quiet smile that carried both respect and sympathy. Your grandfather trusted you for a reason, she said before stepping away to join the other board members gathering near the stage. From across the room I could see Daniel speaking with 3 directors who sat together at one of the front tables. At first their expressions showed simple curiosity as he handed them the envelope and the financial summaries. Then the curiosity shifted into focused attention as they read the documents more closely. Their conversation remained low and professional, but the change in posture was unmistakable. A few minutes later one of them signaled discreetly to a staff member from the venue and asked for access to a small conference room located down the hallway outside the ballroom. The group of board members stood quietly and began moving toward the exit without attracting much attention from the guests still enjoying the celebration. I remained near the bar watching the process unfold exactly the way my grandfather had described during those afternoons in his study years ago. Responsible decisions inside large organizations rarely arrive with dramatic speeches or sudden confrontations. They begin with quiet conversations between people who understand the system they are protecting. Nearly 20 minutes passed before Daniel returned to speak with me again. "The board will meet privately in the conference room for the initial review tonight," he explained. "The formal 72-hour governance process will begin once the documentation is submitted through the legal office first thing tomorrow morning. During that period, executive authority will transfer temporarily to the board while we examine the evidence in detail." He paused for a moment before adding the final part of the explanation. "Your father will be notified by the board after the review process begins. The timing of that conversation will depend on how quickly the board reaches its preliminary conclusions." I looked across the ballroom again toward the stage where my father now stood with my mother greeting another group of guests. He appeared relaxed and confident, exactly as he had all evening. In that moment I realized something that felt strangely peaceful rather than frightening. For most of my life my father believed strength meant controlling every room he entered. My grandfather believed strength meant building systems that continued working even when no single person controlled them anymore. Daniel placed the envelope back into my hands and offered a steady nod. "The process has started," he said quietly. "Now we let the system do what it was designed to do." I slipped the envelope into my purse once more and watched as the board members disappeared down the hallway toward the conference room where their meeting would begin. Behind me the band started another song and the dance floor filled with guests celebrating 25 years of my parents' marriage. The evening looked exactly the same to everyone else in the room. But somewhere beyond the ballroom doors the future of Whitaker Financial Holdings had already begun to change. The board meeting lasted nearly 40 minutes in the small conference room down the hallway while the celebration continued in the ballroom as if nothing unusual had happened at all. From where I stood near the edge of the room I could still hear the band playing and the soft rhythm of conversations drifting through the open doors, but my attention remained fixed on the hallway where the directors had disappeared earlier. Every few minutes a waiter passed carrying trays of drinks toward the dance floor while guests laughed and congratulated my parents. No one realized that only 30 feet away the future leadership of Whitaker Financial Holdings was being discussed in calm, careful detail. Eventually the conference room door opened and the board members stepped back into the hallway together. Daniel Mercer walked at the front of the group with the same composed expression he had maintained throughout the evening. Maria Alvarez followed beside him, her face thoughtful but steady. The rest of the directors moved quietly behind them, speaking in low voices that carried the tone of professionals who had just finished reviewing something serious. When Daniel saw me waiting near the bar he approached with the measured calm that had guided the board for years. "We have completed the preliminary review of the information you provided," he said quietly. "The board agrees that the debt exposure and refinancing timelines require immediate oversight. According to the governance clause your grandfather created, executive authority will transfer to the board for the 72-hour review period beginning tomorrow morning once the legal office receives the formal documentation." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle in without the rush of emotion I might have expected earlier in my life. Daniel continued speaking carefully so that only I could hear him over the music. The board will notify your father privately before the process becomes official. That conversation will happen tonight, so there are no surprises in the morning. He paused briefly before adding the final part. The decision to initiate this review was unanimous. Hearing that word made something inside my chest feel lighter than it had all evening. This had never been about proving a personal point. It was about ensuring the people responsible for protecting the company had the chance to examine the risks clearly. Daniel gave a small nod before turning toward the ballroom where my father still stood greeting guests near the stage. "It is time to speak with him," he said. I remained where I was as the group of board members walked calmly across the room. The music softened as one of the songs ended, and for a moment the room seemed unusually quiet while Daniel approached my father. From a distance the conversation began politely. My father smiled the way he always did when speaking with important partners, his posture relaxed and confident. Then Daniel said something that caused my father's expression to shift slightly. It was not anger at first, only confusion. A few seconds later Maria joined the conversation and handed him the envelope containing the trust document. My father read the first page quickly, his brow tightening as the meaning of the language became clear. He looked up toward the board members again with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Even from across the room I could see the moment he realized this was not a casual discussion about business strategy. Olivia noticed the tension and walked over to join them while my mother stood a few steps behind trying to understand what was happening. The conversation remained quiet but intense as Daniel explained the governance clause and the review process the board had agreed to initiate. My father's voice rose slightly at one point before he lowered it again, clearly aware that the ballroom remained full of guests. Finally his eyes moved across the room until they found me standing near the bar. For several seconds we simply looked at each other. I could see the questions forming in his mind. How had the quiet daughter he had joked about only an hour earlier become the person holding the document that triggered a board review of his leadership? The answer existed in years of observation he had never taken seriously. After another moment Daniel placed a hand lightly on my father's shoulder and guided the conversation toward the hallway so they could continue privately away from the guests. Olivia followed them quickly, her expression tight with frustration. My mother remained standing near the stage watching them leave with a look of confusion that slowly turned toward me as if she were searching for an explanation. I did not move. The music resumed again and the celebration continued around us, but the tone of the evening had quietly changed in a way only a few people in the room could sense. 20 minutes later my father returned alone through the ballroom doors. His expression was no longer relaxed or confident. It carried the controlled tension of someone who had just realized the system he believed he controlled had rules he could not ignore. He walked toward me slowly through the crowd until he stood only a few feet away. For the first time that evening the room felt completely silent between us even though the music continued behind my back. "You initiated this review," he said quietly. It was not a question. I met his gaze calmly the same way my grandfather had taught me to face difficult conversations. "I provided information the board needed to see clearly," I replied. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then my father exhaled slowly and looked away toward the hallway where the board members had disappeared earlier. The 72-hour review had not even officially begun yet, but the balance of authority in our family had already changed. The rest of that evening ended quietly even though the meaning of what had begun would echo far beyond the ballroom walls. My father stood across from me for another moment, the music and conversations of 200 guests moving around us like nothing had changed, yet both of us understood that something fundamental already had. For years he had been the unquestioned authority in every room connected to the company my grandfather built. Now the system my grandfather designed had placed that authority into review. My father looked at me again with a mixture of frustration and disbelief that he tried to hide behind a controlled expression. "You should have come to me first," he said quietly. The words were not shouted. They were delivered with the careful restraint of someone who knew too many eyes surrounded us. I answered him calmly because this moment had never been about anger. "I did try to speak during dinner months ago when I asked about the debt structure on the Phoenix development," I said. "You laughed and said I worry too much about details." He did not respond to that immediately. Instead, he looked across the ballroom toward the hallway where the board members had disappeared earlier. For the first time since the celebration began, his confidence looked uncertain, not shattered but forced to acknowledge that something outside his control had begun moving forward. My mother approached us slowly, her expression filled with questions she had not yet voiced. Olivia followed a few seconds later with the sharp focus of someone who had just learned that the future she expected might be less certain than she believed. "What is happening?" my mother asked quietly. My father answered before I could speak. "The board is reviewing some financial concerns about the company," he said carefully. His choice of words avoided blame, but it did not hide the truth either. Olivia looked directly at me then. "Did you start this?" she asked. I met her gaze with the same steady calm I had carried all evening. "I provided the analysis the board needed to see," I replied. Her expression tightened for a moment as if she were searching for a response sharp enough to cut through the quiet certainty of my answer. But before she spoke, Daniel Mercer returned from the hallway and addressed my father with the calm authority of someone representing the board rather than a family conversation. "Richard, the board will begin the formal governance review tomorrow morning as required by the trust agreement," he said. "We will keep the process professional and focused on the evidence." Daniel's tone carried no accusation, only responsibility. My father nodded slowly. "I understand the procedure," he replied. The rest of the celebration continued because there was no reason to disrupt it publicly. Guests danced, glasses were raised, and the photographer captured smiling images that would later appear in family albums. But beneath that polished surface, everyone closest to the situation understood the evening had quietly shifted direction. The 72-hour review period began the following morning when the legal office received the formal documentation. For 3 days the board examined every piece of financial data connected to the expansion strategy one had outlined in my analysis. Debt obligations were reviewed, interest projections recalculated, and long-term risk models compared against the company's available capital. Maria Alvarez worked closely with the auditors to ensure every number was accurate. Daniel Mercer coordinated the discussions between board members and outside financial advisors who evaluated the company's exposure if market conditions changed unexpectedly. During that time, my father remained professional but distant, attending meetings when required and defending the expansion strategy he had championed for years. Olivia argued passionately that the company needed bold growth to stay competitive in a rapidly changing market. The conversations were not dramatic or emotional. They were careful, analytical, and grounded in the numbers my grandfather had once taught me to read. On the third evening, the board reached its final conclusion. Whitaker Financial Holdings was not collapsing, but the current strategy placed the company at a level of financial risk that required immediate correction. The board voted to restructure the expansion plan and refinance several major loans before market conditions shifted further. More importantly, they voted to separate the role of chief executive officer from the chairman oversight position my father held, placing operational authority under a new executive team supervised directly by the board. The decision was not framed as punishment. It was presented as stabilization. My father remained involved with the company but no longer held unilateral control over its direction. When the decision became official the following morning, Daniel called me personally to explain the outcome. "The system worked exactly as your grandfather intended," he said. "The company will remain stable and the board will oversee the transition carefully." After the call ended, I sat quietly in my apartment for several minutes thinking about everything that had led to that moment. The numbers my grandfather showed me when I was 13. The envelope he placed on the table years later. The speech my father delivered at the anniversary celebration that convinced him nothing about the future needed to change. None of it had happened quickly. It unfolded slowly across years of observation that no one in my family believed I was paying attention to. A week later I visited my grandfather's old house in Cambridge and stood for a moment inside the study where he once explained how businesses survive when leaders remember to listen to the warning signs hidden in their own systems. The company he built was still standing because those systems finally did what they were designed to do. And for the first time in my life I understood something clearly that my father had never expected to learn from the quiet daughter he once joked about in a crowded ballroom. Strength is not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it is the person who watched carefully long enough to know exactly when silence is no longer responsible.